In 1817, economist David Ricardo challenged pricing theories when he wrote, "Corn is not high because rent is paid, but rent is paid because corn is high." A couple of hundred years later, this is a little hard to wrap our heads around. So let me elaborate. Ricardo simply meant that it is the market that dictates the price, not the cost of the goods and supplies that go into making it. In other words, farmers wouldn't charge more for corn because of the amount of money the landowners charge the farmers for rent. But it is the market that dictates the price of the corn, and as the price increases, the market value of that corn will raise the market price for the rent, and the landowners will ultimately capture the residual. The same concept applies today. Let me give an example. If one of us was to create a new laptop to compete with an Apple MacBook Pro, for example, and it cost us $10,000 to make that laptop, do you think that we'd be able to sell it for $13,000, $12,000, or even $11,000? Of course not, because the market value is somewhere around $3,000, as established by Apple. This may sound like an extreme example, but the car company, Bugatti, reported a loss of around $6 million on each Veyron it sold. They calculated this based on the number of cars sold, the price, the cost of manufacturing, the cost of R&D, which was significantly high when trying to set a new bar for hypercars. So why did they do that? Because the market simply wouldn't have responded to a $7 or $8 million price tag. That said, these losses paid dividends in the long term after introducing the next models at a higher price using some of the same technology used in the Veyron. These concepts may go against cost plus, also known as cost-based pricing models. So why do so many people find cost-based models attractive? In my opinion, it's a combination of many reasons. First, some smaller organizations simply lack confidence in their products or services, and they work hard to understand the cost in order to price their product as inexpensively as possible. Another reason is that CFOs and other financial experts appreciate the straightforward path to calculating an effective price point, which is much simpler in a cost-based model. And finally, and I see this mostly in smaller organizations and smaller companies, the price sensitivity of the individuals making the decisions is projected onto the customers. So satisfying the customers is now tied in their minds to lower costs. And the relentless desire to succeed leads to lowering prices to avoid any obstacles that may come in the way of success. Now, I may have overgeneralized a little bit. Cost is very important to consider. And I'm certain that in some cases I'd approve of a cost-plus model. But generally, specifically when thinking globally, there are many more considerations that need to be studied and researched prior to putting up your price tag. Today, I'll talk about some of the main elements that need to be researched and understood before pricing your products, including competition, longevity, maximizing profit, brand image, and cultural consideration. Let's start with competition. Comparing a brand to the competition is one of the best ways to gain brand insights and to signal to your customers your place in that market. We don't expect Lamborghini to be inexpensive, and we most likely won't pay as much for a Toyota as we would for a Mercedes. That doesn't necessarily mean that Lamborghini is more successful than Toyota. All it says is that they have a competitive advantage that tempts the customers to pay more. A product's strengths and benefits may be good reasons to increase the price, but only if your competitors don't offer the same benefits. In other words, there is a big difference between strength and competitive advantage. Strengths are great to identify, but the market won't necessarily perceive them as strengths unless they are unique to your product. For example, a 10-year-old computer is still a very impressive machine. If I could build one, I would probably be very proud of myself. That said, customers may not share that sentiment with me. If I try to convince them to buy that computer, they simply will say there are other more powerful ones on the market. In Jordan, we have a saying that loosely translates to, "The mother of a donkey sees her son as a deer." That saying comes to mind almost every time I'm in front of a client describing to me why their company is so good. Business owners are typically proud of their products, and their opinion is generally biased. Ultimately, when assessing competitors, I would utilize customer reviews, survey data, any information that could help me identify what benefits are most appealing to the customer. Then I would make a list of all the alternatives your customers have access to. You might choose at that point to list all the competitors on a column and give each of the benefits its own row to gain a more objective understanding of how your brand is perceived. Competition is certainly one of the most significant items to analyze before pricing your products. But as I mentioned earlier, the findings need to be combined with other research to get the full picture. Next, I'll talk about longevity. The two questions I like to ask when assessing longevity are, will your profit margins still sustain your business as you continue to grow? And how will customers feel if you raise your price in the future? The answer to the first question will require a little bit of research, good business foresight, and some optimism. As you grow, you may recognize the significance of legal counsel. More stakeholders are impacted by your business, and you will need to have them in mind when making decisions. You might get sued. You may need to professionally train your employees. You'll also need to factor in lower efficiency. Some may dispute this statement because of economies of scale. In other words, the marginal cost or cost of producing extra units will help dilute the overhead costs and then maximize profits. While that is true, it is only true up to a certain extent. The prices do indeed go down initially, but at a certain point, expenses and the inefficiencies go up. Too many chefs in the kitchen comes to mind. Think of how much it costs a government agency to get things done versus a smaller and more agile business. In many cases, the government's costs in writing a line of code are 10 to 20 times more than that of a small business. Now to the second question. How will customers feel if you were to change your price? Groupon is a good example. For those of you who aren't familiar, Groupon shares promotions and deep discounts with those who subscribe to it. Their value proposition is simple. If you don't have people coming through the door, give Groupon a chance to promote you, and they will only get paid if customers purchase from you. So, would you rather sell at a 40% discount or not sell anything at all? Although it sounds like a no-brainer, it has a severe side effect. Customers who purchase at a deep discount are not likely to come back and purchase at a full price. Professor Dan Ariely, author of Predictably Irrational, calls this an anchor. The first price presented to the customer is likely to stick with them. So if you eat at a restaurant at a 50% discount, that price is anchored in your mind, and you will assess your entire experience based on that price. In other words, as a customer, if you felt satisfied, you were satisfied at that discounted price point. And chances are you will not come back to pay the full price because of your anchored perception. I think Elon Musk learned from Hyundai's mistake when introducing Tesla. Hyundai introduced their cars at a low price, and they were known as an inexpensive car. Now that Hyundai is doing its best to compete with Toyota, the customer's perception is still not there. Hyundai is throwing in lots of bells and whistles in their standard lineup. They're offering unbelievable warranties. Their quality has gone up, and they're investing in beautiful designs, all in an effort to change our perception. But at least for many of us, Hyundai still feels like second best when comparing it to its Japanese counterparts. Tesla did the exact opposite. They introduced their first Roadster in association with Lotus at a very high price. The second car they introduced was the Model S, which despite its lower cost of production was priced similar to a Mercedes S-Class or a BMW 7 Series, plus 2 years worth of service and gas. Although Musk had the goal of placing Tesla within the reach of most people, that expensive price tag of the Roadster, the Model S, and Model X made Model 3s so appealing to those who otherwise wouldn't be willing to spend $60,000 on a car. Assessing your long-term goals, predicting future costs, and understanding that it is so much easier to drop your price in the future rather than increase it will help you get another step closer to pricing your products or services. The next point is maximizing profits. We can't talk about price without showing proper respect to the rules of economics. The intersection point between the demand and the supply will show us the ideal equilibrium, which will help us understand the price point that will appeal to enough people to use up the supply. Sometimes we can't find sufficient data to calculate profit maximization, especially if you're taking a product into a brand new region. So a simpler analysis might be enough. The idea is to cross-reference the demand at different price points while understanding the quantity of the supply. An example I used in a Forbes article referred to a small food truck business. If they can find that pricing a meal at $10 will help them sell 100 meals during a given lunchtime, whereas pricing it at $8 will help them sell 140 meals, holding everything else equal, the $8 price point will bring in the optimal price and therefore the maximum profit possible by selling that meal in that market at that time. This leads us to brand image, which is closely tied to the competitive analysis that I discussed earlier. Essentially, how you price something signals a message to your customers. Most people subscribe to the idea of getting what you pay for, meaning if you pay more, you can expect more. Although that's not always the case, there is still room in the market for brand name medicine when the generic form of the same medicine is sold for, in some cases, half the price. Some people are proud to wear a Timex, and others feel like a Rolex fits better within their identity. Although the quality and the features of the Rolex don't justify the steep difference in price, each of the brands understands their identity and what they mean to their customers. Being a price leader is a strategy, and it could be a very effective strategy. But being a quality leader, often signaled with fancier packaging or better customer service, is also appealing to many. Staying true to your brand identity means having consistency in your communications, which would include colors, fonts, brand voice, social media, logos, and so on and so forth, but it also includes pricing. When expanding globally, brand image needs to align with cultural considerations. For example, in the US, labor is relatively expensive, so a chain like Jiffy Lube or a service center at a Honda dealership, for example, signal their brand image with their pricing. The dealer typically charges a premium due to their specializations and experience, while Jiffy Lube may be cheaper, but still expensive compared to other countries. Neither of these businesses would be able to maintain their prices in countries where labor is cheap. In Egypt, for example, or Mexico, labor is significantly cheaper than it is in the US, and the cultures simply won't accept paying mechanics more than they would for professions that require a master's degree, for example. Entering these countries with a build it and they will come attitude or expectation will potentially cause devastating losses. I hope you found this helpful. I am not suggesting an exact formula or an algorithm that will suggest a price based on the research gathered. Researching different products and different services will uncover different results. In some cases, cultural considerations may not be as important of a factor as other items on the list. But in other products, you may uncover a lot of insights by studying the culture. Identifying the relevant data from cultural considerations, brand image, maximizing profits, longevity, and competition will help paint a picture and tell a story that turns the data into information that will help you find the right price point.